I promise to try and get everybody back on time. I know it's been a long 2 days for you, and the last thing you need is me up here. I wish I'd come yesterday because I could have tweaked what I was going to say for today. I feel a little bit of a fraud, and I feel a little embarrassed. Being a guy stood up here, white, middle class, listening to some of the things that some female athletes and female leaders have shared with us today. There's so much more to do, isn't there? And it's quite stark. On more of an upbeat note, though, I want to say thank you to Omnia Group. Great organisation, great topics, and fab hospitality from the minute I walked in today to right now. I've been looked after, so thank you as a team. Just about sport then. Lots of people talked about sport changing their lives. I don't actually believe that, and we at UK Coaching don't believe that. We think people change lives, people in sport. Sport's a fantastic medium. Whether you just want to have fun, make friends, be more confident, be a world champion, sport is a brilliant medium, just as the arts are, just as music is, just as the outdoors are. But ultimately, the people that coach or use coaching skills to develop the people that they're looking after, the participants, that's what's critical. I'm going to use some generalizations behind this. This is all research-based, the data and evidence behind everything I'm going to say, but the generalizations, I'll give you an example so you understand what that is. Generally, my kids don't listen to a word of advice that I give them. That's not to say that they don't sometimes listen. So a lot of generalisations here. But before I go on, I just want to talk a little bit about UK Coaching and what we do. I should probably do this. That was the topic. It got missed in the itinerary because I was late. But why do we need more female coaches anyway? It's meant to be rhetorical, and I'm glad there's nobody with anything heavy to throw at me. But before I go on to that, I want to talk a little bit about our organisation. UK Coaching is a membership organisation. We currently have 250,000 coaches registered with us, and we're getting over 100 coaches registering every day. So we're growing quite rapidly. We believe that just as the coach is there for the athlete or the participant, so we are there for the coach because they are people too. So one of our strong beliefs is that the coaching workforce need more support and more help to make things better for their participants, both to protect their participants from harm, but also to keep them protected. Our vision is deliberately external. Coaching isn't something that exists on its own, it sits within the ecosystem. So how do we better engage and support and develop the coaching workforce because they're part of the delivery system for sport and physical activity. So they're not a means to an end in themselves, they're part of the ecosystem. And we know that coaches change lives for the positive and communities, and sometimes they do get it wrong. But in the most, there's 3 million people that are coaching in the UK, and they're making a significant difference to people's lives. Our mission is to be the go-to, not just our own material, not our own products and services, but anything that can help a coach be better. So giving the coaching workforce everything they need to be the best people that they can be to deliver in the sector. Okay, so on the face of it, this looks great, right? There's lots and lots of female activity going on, and we're seeing an unprecedented rise in recognition of women's participation in elite sport. But actually behind the scenes is very different. There is still stark differences between boys and girls, women and men in terms of participation. So what is it that we can do if we're going to truly build an active nation? I guess part of it is about providing opportunity in equal measure. And one of the things that I've heard today is that everything's been built up the wrong way. We're kind of putting everything that evolved out of men's competitive sport, and we're trying to shoehorn that into women's activity and sport. So what is it that we can do to make sure that the next generation that comes through has an equal opportunity? I feel I can talk about this a little bit because my daughter went through the performance pathway of sport. She went through netball, then into hockey. And she also had a couple of experiences where it really resonated with me in terms of her journey. So for example, my daughter played rugby league when she was in primary school. Absolutely loved it. She's short, stocky, really powerful, really determined, quite a robust and determined young lady. She went to secondary school and they said, no, we're having none of that. You can choose hockey or you can choose netball, you can do a bit of both. So that was the first thing that I remember for her. She actually then started playing netball for the school that she was at, and they won a national tournament at national level, and they were given £1,000 towards kit. The money went back to the school. The school put the money back into the weights gym for the boys' rugby team who were playing at 3 divisions lower. So as a father, as a coach, as someone working in the sector, as a leader, if you like, in the sector, What can we do to make a difference to the next generation, to make sure that that's not the experience that they have, but it's actually equal? I think it's important as well not to say it's not just about female coaches, it's about coaches per se. And I think one of the big things there is about choice. What is it that we need more female coaches to be there for? Well, it's about choice. It doesn't matter what I do biologically as a male coach, I'm never going to understand what it feels like to be a female athlete. So the stats this morning where there's 13%, I think it said, female coaches at the next Olympic Games. Well, how does that work? How does that work to support the female athletes? I don't think it does. We haven't always got it right, so this is a couple of the programs that we run. So we are funded partly by UK Sport and Sport England to work with women in coaching. And for a number of years, we ran a bunch of activities that looked at specific programs for women-only coaches to come in and talk about how they become better as a community, how they could support each other, how they could move forward. 3-4 years into the program, we realised, and this is the theme of this afternoon, we got it completely wrong. Because what we're starting to see is that it's actually exacerbating the problem. If we work just purely with female coaches to say, we're trying to make you better, it's like the goldfish analogy. You take a goldfish out of a really healthy pond or bowl of water and you put it into a toxic pond, it's not going to work. So working with female coaches and then putting them into a toxic environment, it's not welcoming, it doesn't work. Things that they said to us, so we interviewed lots of these female coaches through the programs we did, can't get support. Whenever they ask for support, there's always a barrier in the way, whether it's equipment, whether it's access to facilities, whether it's support for them, whether it's educational stuff, there was always something in the way. Doesn't seem like it's a level playing field. Quite often, everything, and we heard it today, even now, Arsenal putting their top players from the female squad onto their pitch, it's only just now. So what is it that we didn't do in the beginning to put that opportunity in front of them? Poor working conditions. Lots of local clubs at community level, we had lots of female coaches saying, there's male-only changing rooms. There isn't a facility for us as a coach, or let alone the athletes. So what can we do around there? Lack of flexibility in terms of working time. So if you are a parent with children, and it applies to guys as well, how do you manufacture the day to make sure that you can fit in coaching an activity that fits both male and female coaches, male and female participants? We just haven't built the system from the bottom up, and we're trying to fudge what we've got back into to fit other people, to make it more diverse. Not recognised for the roles that they fulfil. So there's lots of things that came out of these programs. What we've now got is integrated programs, but the difference is the recruitment makes sure that the demographics that come into the programs are representative of our society, not just male, female, but all of the demographics. So we're making sure that we're recruiting from the sports to make sure that we've got a real mixed society within these programs, that's reflecting the society outside. But it's deeper rooted than that, and I'm not kicking football, and excuse the pun. You've only got to go back to the World War I, where all the guys went out to war to fight, the women worked in munitions factories, they started playing football. We heard today that, 50,000 spectators in the Arsenal stadium. There were 50,000 spectators that came and watched women's football just after the World War. When the guys returned, the FA banned women's participation in football for nearly 50 years. It was only in 1970 that women were permitted, and I heard that word used a lot today by a lot of the women that stood up here, permitted. There's something fundamentally wrong in the way that we're talking about female participation. Things like football's for boys, that stereotype. Things like throw like a girl. Things like women should only coach women's sport. Those are things that we're still trying to understand and take the language away from, so that we understand that actually this is about people. Coach. I went to a female women's conference in Sweden, and the big title was, just call me coach. So they were sick of being called a female coach. They're a coach who happens to be female. They're a leader who happens to be female. We talked about female leadership earlier. And sorry, Dave, but everything in sport, women's edition. There's some things we've got to fix. We have got some really good success, and we've talked a little bit about it today, and thank goodness we've got some role models that are getting there. But are they getting there because of the system, or are they getting there despite the system? Emma Hayes has been quoted a couple of times today. I mean, prolific. I have written it down, actually. 6 Women's Super League, 5 FA Cups, 2 League Cups. But, she's a great advocate for what should happen for both female participation but also female coaching. Mel Marshall, Adam Peaty's coach. If you speak to Mel, she's unstoppable, but she's got there despite the system, I think. And more recently, which is brilliant, Paula Dunn, UK Athletics, has just been appointed as head coach at UKA. So fantastic stuff being done, but there's so much more to do. So, can we continue what we've started? Are we actually truly inclusive? And I mentioned it earlier, I think we've got to rebuild the system and almost not throw away the old, but take the good bits, but actually start from scratch. What does it mean to be a female coach in a predominantly male environment or traditionally male environment? So what is it that we need to change up the tree? Because it's not the women and the female coaches that's the problem, it's the policy and it's the systems. So how do we get back up there and start changing policy? And that's where we're starting to represent female coaches more strongly and drive policy change. Things like organisational structures. I had a student last year from Loughborough who was doing her PhD on leadership in sport governing bodies, and she rang us up and said, Mark, I just want 5 minutes of your time. I want to talk about the Sports Governance Code and how the percentages have changed your board structure. So what is the percentage on your board in terms of your leadership, male, female? Well, I was pleased to say it was 50-50. She said, that's fantastic. She said, what about your staff? And I said, well, it's 60-40. I said, well, it's 57, 57-43. So 57 female, 43 male in the workforce. And she said, okay, so what about your leadership team? I said, it's 70-30. She went, oh, great, so you've just about met the threshold. I went, what do you mean? And I knew what she meant. She said, you've got 30% women. And I said, no, it's the other way around. You've got 70% women that are on our leadership team, 30% are male. She said, well, why? And I said, well, why not? She said, well, no, what I mean is how comes? And I said, well, because we got a 50-50 recruitment, the shortlist was 50-50 male-female, and we appointed the best people for the job. So even things like recruitment, how do we start to influence recruitment in terms of players, participants? How do we change that from the top down so that we've got more female leaders at the top, making more decisions for more of the community? Underrepresentation, recruitment, working conditions. I mentioned those things before. We talked a little bit about cultural practices, some of the stereotyping, some of the statements that are made, definitions of leadership and language. Even today there was some, and forgive me to be blunt, apologetic language that some of the female talkers spoke about in terms of what their role is in sport. And I think it's a generation, 2 generations, 3 generations that have put that oppressive kind of levy on what women can actually achieve in this area. So at some point we've got to step back and say, okay, so how do we rewrite the rules? Support and advocacy is critical, and I think the underpinning thing to all of today was research. Everybody talked about the fact that there wasn't research in equipment to make sure that the right equipment to avoid injury. There was research in terms of really understanding what it looks like to be a female coach or to be a male coach coaching female athletes. So there are solutions, and the solutions are better environments, and coaches have a massive role to play in that. So giving coaches the right learning, the right development to set the environment for everybody to be successful. I think there's better learning. We talked about learning today, and I think there was a lot of talk about reactive stuff when things have gone wrong, but I think it should be 70% over here in terms of proactive. So what are we learning over here so that we can influence over here from an education point of view? And I think a fairer system. So where is the investment? We heard about prize money. Thank goodness for tennis that have gone, actually the prize money for male, female players is the same, but there's still a massive divide, massive gap in terms of investment. The policies, we talked about people being allowed in the long room of the cricket boardroom. So what are the policies that we're going to change? Recruitment I've talked about, structured decision making, and again, visibility. I think it's really time to break the existing dominant male culture that we have within sport and physical activity. And I think it's more male figureheads stepping aside, allowing other leaders to come through and making sure that leadership is more conducive to who we are and what we're trying to achieve. So it comes full circle. Why female coaches? Well, choice is the first one. If you're a female athlete and you want a female coach, that should be available to you, in my opinion. If you want a male coach that understands more about female anatomy, maturation, then we've got to do more around education. I think we've got to talk about it now, and we've got to actually do something with it now. So Dave said this morning, it's great talking, but what are we actually starting to do? There are things, Tim Hollingsworth talked about investment in women in sport. We actually are working with women in sport and with a women's coaching task force to understand, well, how do we develop female coaches? How do we develop male coaches for female participants? What can we do that's more like that? But here's what I truly believe, and these are generalizations. Sue Anstice actually quoted me in her book. We had a drink or two one evening, and she said, Mark, what would make the difference in terms of the next generation and participation? And I said, really simply, more female coaches. And why do I say that? Well, women are generally people-driven. They want to know more about the person that they're looking after. They want to know more about the person that they're talking to. Guys tend to focus inwardly. It's a generalization, but if you speak to most people, females listen better and they learn better. Guys dictate and tell. And I think that's the difference between coaching. Coaching's facilitation, it's not tell. That's very different. So I think just the culture, and I'll give you a really good outside of sport example. Up until 3 years ago, our technology team of 4 people were all guys. And there was quite a bit of banter, whatever that looks like. We employed a technician that was female, and I've got to tell you, overnight, the culture of that team changed. Just changed. And that's because we got somebody else with a different view coming in, and it also made maybe a couple of guys that are a bit laddie behave differently. So that in itself is a minor thing in terms of bringing someone in, but makes such a massive difference. If you look at the primary teaching fraternity, it's mainly female. It's not by accident, it's because they have a better affinity with the next generation. They are more driven about developing a young person, and it's a generalization. I'm not saying that everybody that is male is a poor coach and not driven like that. But there are so many things that we could learn from just the approach that a lot of female coaches take that I think we fellas could learn an awful lot. And I said earlier, being a female participant, I can't possibly understand what that looks like. I can do the learning and I can, understand what the biological makeup is, and I can understand menopause and the impact it might have, but actually sometimes you just need to speak to somebody like you. So, best people for the job. I think we are missing a trick if we do not bring more female coaches on board. Everybody says that, well, how do you go about that? And I think there's some solutions in there. But one of the people that I heard at a conference last year, a guy called Butch Fazel, he's the head of diversity inclusion at the FA. And he was at a conference giving a speech about what the FA were doing to try and make sure that more female coaches were available for more female participants and how to increase female participation. And a more traditional sport that has been mentioned today, not by me, but earlier, one of the guys that's head of development there said, look, it's great, Buzz. You've got all this money in the FA, you've got all these opportunities. What about us as a medium-sized sport? What is it that we need to do? And Butch sort of thought for a minute, and he just took a second. He went, just try harder. And it was a bit flippant, but I think that's what we need to do. We just need to try harder. I think sometimes we wait for policy change, but actually we have all got a responsibility in the room, and so have our colleagues in the ecosystem, to just make the change, just do it. I think we've talked about this for quite a while, and one of my frustrations is, and it's brilliant that Lionesses have done so well, it's brilliant that female football is flying, but we waited for a pretty prolific event before we suddenly started to think about investing. So why not invest now, based on fairness, based on the fact that the population is 50-50, so do the right thing. We as a collective need to start doing the right thing. I'm just aware that we're bang on time, and I have rushed this a little bit, so forgive me. There was a few other bits I wanted to do, but I think if I could leave you with just one thing, and it's probably broader than just women in coaching and women in leadership, it's about equity across the board. It's about inclusion. Lots of the principles, try harder, recruitment process, lots of the principles about making sure that we've got a reflective, sport ecosystem that reflects our society. Sport can really put its head above the parapet and challenge some of our societal challenges. So we've got a great opportunity. So I just think we need to be more mindful about being inclusive, and I think we need to try harder. And I guess the final thing is, if we treat people as people in sport as opposed to products, because quite often athletes, coaches, administrators, officials are just products of the system, but they're actually all people too. Sorry for the whistle-stop tour through, but I appreciate it's 5 o'clock and you guys want to go home.